Before I ever sat behind a desk in an office downtown, before I learned what it felt like to leave work with clean hands and a quiet mind, I spent 2 years as a UPS driver. On paper, it was a good job, steady pay, benefits, a sense of routine. For the most part, I liked it. I liked being alone in the truck, liked the simple satisfaction of finishing a route, liked knowing exactly what was expected of me. But delivery work has a way of putting you in places you were never meant to be. This was back in 2010. I'd been out of college for about 2 years, still trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. UPS wasn't a dream job, but it paid the bills, and at that stage of my life, that was enough. I worked the 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. shift on Thursdays. In the dead of winter, that meant darkness came early. By 5 o'clock, the sun was already gone, and the world felt smaller, quieter, more closed in. I wasn't working in a big city or a wealthy suburb. I was in a small town in North Carolina, the kind of place people pass through without stopping. I wouldn't call it ghetto, but it wasn't nice either. The town had a tired look to it. Houses in disrepair, empty lots where something used to be, streets that felt forgotten. The layout was strange. Some blocks were packed with houses and trailer homes lined up too close together, while others were almost completely empty. You'd have one house, then a stretch of nothing but trees, then another house half a mile down. It made deliveries slow. The distance between stops meant more time driving, more isolation, and fewer people around if something went wrong. By the time I reached my last cluster of deliveries that evening, it was a little after 6 p.m. My shift was winding down, and I was tired in that dull, manageable way you get after a long day of repetitive work. There was one delivery left on a stretch of road I knew well. Trailer homes and small houses on one side, dense forest on the other. The package was marked signature required. I sighed when I saw that. Those were always a pain. You couldn't just drop the box and go. You had to make contact. Someone had to open the door. Someone had to sign. I pulled the truck up in front of the address and parked. The house, or trailer, really, set back a bit from the road. No lights were on. No car in the driveway. That usually meant no one was home, which would have been annoying but simple. Mark it undeliverable and move on. I opened the back of the truck and immediately felt my mood drop. The box was massive. One of the biggest of the day, easily the heaviest. When I lifted it, I heard metal pieces clanking and shifting inside. Lots of them. Small parts. Loose. Whatever it wasn't cheap. I hefted it against my chest and walked it up to the front door. There was no doorbell. I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. I was about to turn away when I noticed movement behind one of the windows. The curtain shifted slightly, just enough to tell me someone was inside. A moment later, I heard slow footsteps approaching the door. Then nothing. The footsteps stopped. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. It was an uncomfortably long pause, long enough that I felt myself tense up without knowing why. Finally, the door cracked open. An older woman peeked out at me through the narrow opening. She looked pale, her eyes sunken, hair thin and unkempt. She didn't smile, didn't greet me, just stared. I introduced myself and told her I had a package that needed to be signed for. She opened the door wider. The smell hit me immediately. Every house has a smell. Some are pleasant, some neutral, some bad, but this was different. This smell was thick, heavy like it clung to the air. A mix of rot, dampness, and something sour I couldn't identify. She took the signing device from me with shaking hands and scribbled her name across the screen. The signature was barely legible, a mess of lines. Then she looked at the box and said, "You need to help me carry that to my room." Her tone wasn't polite. It wasn't aggressive either. It was flat, expectant. I hesitated for half a second. Technically, I didn't have to go inside, but refusing would mean lugging the box back to the truck and dealing with paperwork. Against my better judgment, I stepped inside. The interior of the trailer was dimly lit, cluttered, and narrow. The living room was barely wider than the hallway that branched off from it. Old furniture crowded the space, everything coated in a thin layer of dust. The smell was even worse inside. She led the way down a narrow hallway toward the back of the trailer. The box scraped against the walls as I struggled to maneuver it. At the end of the hallway was a bedroom. She opened the door and pointed toward the closet. Put it in there. I peered inside. The room was almost completely dark. Can you turn on a light? I asked. She shook her head. Doesn't work. The only light came from a single lamp in the living room, casting weak shadows down the hall and into the bedroom. I stepped inside, squinting as my eyes tried to adjust. That's when I saw it. Someone was standing in the corner of the closet. At first, my brain refused to process what I was seeing. The darkness played tricks on your vision, and for a split second, I told myself it was just shadows. Then it moved, just slightly, enough to confirm it wasn't a coat rack or stacked boxes. It was a person. They were pressed back into the corner, standing unnaturally still, their outline barely visible against the darkness, but unmistakably human. I couldn't see their face, but I knew they were watching me, waiting. Every alarm in my body went off at once. I didn't say anything. I didn't ask questions. I gently set the box down where I stood, turned around, and walked past the woman without another word. As I stepped into the hallway, she realized something was wrong. Hey, she snapped. You didn't put it where I said. I kept walking. She followed me, her voice rising. You come back here and finish your job. I reached the front door. She started screaming, calling me a piece of shit, yelling that I couldn't just leave, that she needed help. I didn't turn around. I stepped outside, pulled the door shut behind me, and walked straight back to the truck, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I drove away without looking in the mirrors. The rest of my shift passed in a haze. I went home that night and lay awake replaying the scene over and over in my head. I don't know what they planned to do. I don't want to know. But that night marked the beginning of the end for that job. Within weeks, I was actively searching for something else. Because sometimes all it takes is one delivery to realize how close you came to never making it home. I've been a truck driver since I was 25 years old, and by the time this happened, I'd already logged more night miles than most people drive in their entire lives. Night driving becomes routine after a while. You learn how to manage the loneliness, how to keep yourself alert, how to read the road when your visibility shrinks to the narrow tunnel carved out by your headlights. And like most long-haul drivers, I had my share of strange experiences. Odd people at truck stops, weird conversations over CB radios, shadows that looked like animals until they weren't. But nothing compares to what happened to me on a desert road in California. I was hauling a full trailer of wooden furniture, dressers, tables, cabinets, the kind of load that rattles constantly no matter how carefully it's packed. That day, I had to drive from one end of California to the other, a trip that would take many hours even under perfect conditions. I didn't get an early start. By the time I rolled out, I already knew most of the drive would be after dark. Normally, that wouldn't bother me. Desert roads are long, straight, and empty, especially at night. With little traffic and no sudden turns, you can safely push the truck a bit faster than usual. The problem with desert roads isn't what's on them. It's what isn't. No streetlights, no buildings, no sound except the engine and the wind. By the time true darkness settled in, I felt like I was driving through an endless black ocean. The road ahead of me existed only where my headlights touched it. Everything else was gone. That's when I saw flashing lights in the distance. Hazard lights. They blinked slowly, rhythmically, a small island of color floating in the dark horizon. I eased off the accelerator and hit the brakes harder than usual, bringing the semi to a controlled stop behind the car. It was an old Chevy Impala, early 2000s model, pulled onto the dirt shoulder with its hazards still flashing. I sighed. Every driver knows that moment, when you see a stranded vehicle and debate whether to stop. Part of you wants to keep going. The other part remembers that if it were you, you'd hope someone would help. I grabbed my jacket and climbed down from the cab. The air was cold and dry, carrying that empty desert smell, dust, and nothing else. I walked up to the driver's side window and knocked. No response. I knocked again louder. Still nothing. That's when I leaned down and peered through the tinted glass. The driver's seat was empty. I checked the passenger side. Empty. Then the back seats. Empty. No bags. No jacket. No phone on the seat. The car looked abandoned. I straightened up and scanned the area around me. The road stretched endlessly in both directions. Beyond the shoulder, The desert rolled out flat and dark, broken only by low scrub and distant shapes I couldn't quite identify. I felt uneasy, but not enough to leave. I went back to my truck and grabbed my flashlight from the toolbox under the passenger seat. It was a heavy-duty tactical flashlight, bright enough to hurt your eyes if you weren't careful. The moment I switched it on, the beam cut through the darkness and revealed something I hadn't noticed before. An abandoned gas station. It sat just off the road, half swallowed by dirt and time. The lot was all gravel and sand, no pavement, so it blended into the desert until the light hit it. 2 old gas pumps stood crooked and rusted. Behind them was a small building that might have once been a convenience store. That's where the driver must have gone, I told myself. I walked toward the building, boots crunching on gravel. The front door was jammed open, hanging crooked on its hinges. I shined the flashlight inside. The beam illuminated a large, open room with empty shelves, debris scattered across the floor, and peeling paint on the walls. It echoed faintly when I stepped inside. "Hello," I called out. "Truck driver here. You need help." My voice sounded too loud. The echo that came back gave me chills. I took a few steps farther in, sweeping the flashlight across the room. The shelves were knocked over in places, creating narrow paths between them. That's when I heard it. A sound, soft but deliberate, like a shoe scraping against concrete. It came from the far side of the room, somewhere behind the fallen shelves. I stopped walking. "Hey," I called again. "I saw your car outside. Just checking if you're okay." Silence. Then I heard breathing. Heavy, slow, deliberate. It was coming from one corner of the room. My grip tightened on the flashlight. "Sir," I said, "if you need help, I can call it in." That's when I heard a whisper. Low, deep, clear enough that I understood every word. "You shouldn't be here." I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. I couldn't move for a full second, my brain struggling to catch up with what I'd just heard. And something else cut through the silence. A woman screamed. It wasn't close. It sounded distant, like it came from deeper in the building, maybe a back room. That was enough. I turned and ran. I didn't look behind me. I didn't slow down. I sprinted back toward my truck, adrenaline flooding my system so fast my hands went numb. I climbed into the cab and immediately called 911. My voice shook as I explained where I was, or at least tried to. All I could tell them was that I was on a desert road near an abandoned gas station. They asked for mile markers, landmarks, anything. Then, as I was still on the line, the Impala's engine started. The car lurched forward, tires kicking up dust, and took off down the road at high speed. I didn't see anyone get into it. One moment it was empty. The next it was gone. Confusion hit me so hard I almost dropped the phone. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay put, I grabbed the flashlight and ran back toward the building. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I wanted proof I wasn't imagining things. Maybe I thought someone was still inside and needed help. The 911 operator stayed on the line as I stepped back into the station. I followed the sound I remembered, the corner where the breathing had been. That's when I saw it. A fresh pool of blood on the floor. Dark, wet, still spreading. There was no body, no movement, just blood. My stomach dropped. I told the operator I believed I'd stumbled into a crime scene. They instructed me to leave immediately and wait by my truck. State troopers were already on their way. When they arrived, I gave them everything I could remember. The car description, the voice, the scream. They searched the building and the surrounding desert. They found nothing else. No victim, no suspect, just blood. I didn't have a dash cam back then. I installed one the very next week. Some experiences only happen once in your life, but they don't leave when they're done with you. They follow you, especially on empty roads when the desert stretches out endlessly ahead, and you can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, something is still watching the highway, waiting for the next set of headlights to stop. There's a moment every night driver knows, the exact second when your mind slips just enough for reality to feel thin. The road stretches too straight. The darkness feels intentional, and you start wondering whether the things you see are caused by exhaustion or whether exhaustion is what lets you see them at all. I learned the difference on a cold Monday night in Kansas, when something with a smile too wide and a neck too long stepped out of the dark and waited for me to stop. I've been a trucker for most of my adult life. 10 years behind the wheel teaches you things. How to read the weather by smell, how to feel when ice is forming before you ever see it, and how to recognize when fatigue stops being tiredness and turns into something dangerous. 3 years ago, I was working for a warehouse company in Kansas, hauling shipments across long, empty stretches of highway that seemed designed to wear you down. Most nights blurred together. Same roads, same schedules, same humming engine under your feet. February 2nd was supposed to be just another one of those nights. It was a Monday, cold enough that the air felt sharp when you inhaled it, even through the cab. The week had just started, and the warehouse was slammed. Loads stacked, paperwork rushed, dispatch pushing everyone to move fast. I was driving a semi that night, my usual rig. I started my shift around 3 p.m., later than I wanted, but I was determined to make the delivery that same night. I didn't want to pull over somewhere sketchy or sleep on the shoulder. I told myself I'd just push through. That decision still haunts me. By midnight, I was cruising about 5 miles over the speed limit, which for a semi is already flirting with stupid. The road I was on wasn't technically dangerous, but it was isolated. No towns, no gas stations, just blacktop slicing through darkness. After midnight, everything changes. Traffic disappears. Radio stations fade into static, and your thoughts get louder. My eyes were burning, dry. Every blink felt heavier than the last, like my eyelids were gaining weight. I had to consciously force them open, reminding myself, stay awake just one more hour. Less than an hour. That's all I needed. I reached down, grabbed my water bottle, and splashed some onto my hands, rubbing it over my face. The cold helped a little, enough to keep me focused. I remember thinking how strange it was that I hadn't seen another vehicle in a long time. My headlights were the only light in the world. Everything beyond them was swallowed by darkness, so complete it felt solid. That's when I saw him. At first, it was just movement, something wrong in the distance. A shape cutting across the road ahead of me. I took a sip of water, then almost spit it out when my brain caught up with what my eyes were seeing. There was a figure standing in the road. Not walking, not crossing, standing. I slammed the brakes. The truck lurched, tires screaming in protest as the headlights rushed closer. As the rig slowed, details sharpened, and my stomach dropped. It was a man. He was dressed entirely in black, like the darkness itself had shaped him. A black scarf was wrapped tightly around his neck, but what caught my attention, what made my skin crawl, was how long his neck was. Unnaturally long. I know that sounds like a weird thing to focus on, but when you're face to face with something that doesn't look quite right, your brain latches onto the wrongness. His face was worse. It wasn't shadowed. It wasn't hidden. It was blurred, like my eyes refused to focus on it, no matter how hard I tried. No nose, no mouth, no features, just a shifting smear where a face should have been. The truck rolled closer, slowing almost to a stop. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the engine. For a split second, my instincts kicked in. Maybe he needs help. People break down. People get lost. I reached toward the window controls. That's when he turned his head. Slowly, smoothly. He looked to his left, away from me, and then, without warning, he ran. Not stumbled. Not jogged. He darted into the woods with speed that didn't match his thin frame, disappearing between the trees like he'd never been there at all. I didn't stop to think. I hit the gas and kept going. Only after about 20 seconds did my body catch up to what had happened. My hands started shaking. My heart hammered. The adrenaline hit me all at once. What the hell was that? I told myself the only logical explanation. Exhaustion. Hallucinations. My brain misfiring from lack of sleep. 5 minutes later, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. Almost. Because then something else ran across the road. This time, I didn't slow down. It came from my right, low to the ground at first. I thought it was a deer or some kind of animal, but as my headlights caught it mid-stride, I realized it was too tall, too upright. It crossed the road fast and vanished into the woods on the left. Another person. I didn't even tap the brakes. If anything, I pressed the accelerator harder. I just wanted to get out of there. The road stayed quiet after that, but my exhaustion was getting worse. I drifted toward the center line more than once, jerking the wheel to correct myself. 40 minutes left. I knew I couldn't safely make it. I started scanning the roadside for somewhere, anywhere, to pull over. Eventually, I spotted a small gravel opening. No signs, no lights, just a patch of crushed stone wide enough for a rig. I pulled in, parked, shut the engine down. The silence was immediate and heavy. I leaned back in the seat, closed my eyes, telling myself I'd rest for just a little while. I didn't even remember falling asleep. I woke up suddenly, heart racing, breath shallow, staring into pitch-black darkness. I don't know what woke me. There was no noise, no impact, just a deep, instinctive sense that something was wrong. My gut screamed at me to turn on the headlights. I reached for the knob and flicked it on. The beams cut through the dark and illuminated a man standing directly in front of my truck. It was him, the same black scarf, the same impossibly long neck. But now I could see his face. He was smiling, not a friendly smile, not a normal one. His mouth stretched too wide, pulled back farther than human anatomy should allow. His eyes were open as wide as possible, unblinking, staring straight at me through the windshield. He wasn't moving. He was waiting. Every survival instinct I had screamed at once. I started the engine, threw the truck into gear, and pulled out of that clearing as fast as I could without flipping the rig. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I drove until I reached my destination, hands numb on the wheel, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. I slept in the parking lot when I got there and woke up early the next morning, sunlight doing nothing to calm my nerves. I've tried to explain it 100 different ways. Hallucinations, fatigue, stress. But there's one thing I can't reconcile. The distance. From where I first saw him to where he stood in front of my truck was over 10 miles. And I never stopped.